Dog won't stop barking at judge. Seconds later, the entire courtroom freezes in shock. The fluorescent lights of Atlanta Police Department's K9 unit buzzed overhead as Sarah Collins studied the files spread across her desk. Her partner Max, the Belgian Malinois, lay at her feet, his ears perking up at every small sound in the otherwise quiet building. It was well past midnight, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was close to uncovering something big. The pattern in the case dismissals was too perfect to be coincidental. "What do you think, buddy?" she whispered, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. The dog's amber eyes met hers with an intensity that had become familiar over their 5 years together. Max wasn't just any police dog. He was the kind of partner who could read her thoughts before she voiced them. The screen of her computer cast a blue glow across the stack of cases, all drug-related, all dismissed by Judge Robert Henderson over the past 18 months. Sarah had first noticed the pattern 3 weeks ago when one of her own arrests was thrown out on a technicality that felt manufactured. Since then, she'd been working overtime, piecing together what looked increasingly like a deliberate pattern of judicial interference. Max suddenly stood, his posture alert. Seconds later, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. Detective Mike Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his face etched with concern. "Sarah, you're still here? It's almost 2 a.m. "Mike, look at this," Sarah said, gesturing him over. "Every single one of these cases involved seizures worth over $1 million, and every single one was dismissed by Henderson on procedural grounds." Mike leaned over her shoulder, his coffee breath mingling with the lingering scent of yesterday's rain from his coat. "Sarah, you need to be careful with this. Henderson's got friends in high places. Since when do we back off because someone's got connections?" Sarah pushed back from her desk, the wheels of her chair squeaking against the linoleum. Max moved to her side, pressing against her leg in a gesture of solidarity. "I'm not saying back off, I'm saying be smart." Mike's voice dropped lower. "Word is, Henderson's got eyes everywhere. People who've gone after him before, they tend to run into problems." Sarah's hand instinctively went to Max's head. Together, they'd brought down drug operations, found missing children, and tracked countless suspects. But this felt different, bigger, more dangerous. Still, she couldn't walk away. Her father hadn't raised her to look the other way. "I need to check something," she said, standing up. "There's a storage facility mentioned in 3 of these cases, the same one. That can't be a coincidence." Mike grabbed her arm. "Not tonight. Please, Sarah. Go home. Get some rest. Start fresh tomorrow." But Sarah was already gathering her things, Max following her movements with practiced precision. "Just a drive-by. No engagement, I promise." The storage facility sat on the outskirts of Atlanta, a sprawling complex of identical orange doors under harsh security lights. Sarah parked her unmarked car across the street, Max's breath fogging the passenger window as they watched. For 20 minutes, nothing moved, except shadows cast by the swaying trees. Then a black SUV pulled up to Unit 247, the same unit number that kept appearing in the dismissed cases. Sarah reached for her phone to record, but Max's low growl made her freeze. In her rearview mirror, she saw another vehicle approaching, this one familiar. A police cruiser. "Max, down!" she whispered, but her loyal partner was already crouching in the footwell. The cruiser passed slowly, its spotlight sweeping across her car. Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding. The light moved on. She waited until both vehicles were gone before starting her engine. Whatever was happening here went deeper than she'd imagined. She needed more evidence, needed to be smart about this. The drive home was tense, filled with possibilities and fears. Max kept his eyes on the road, occasionally turning to check on her as if he could sense her unease. They were almost home when Sarah noticed the dark sedan that had been following them for the last 10 minutes. "We've got company, boy," she murmured, taking a series of random turns to confirm her suspicion. The sedan stayed with them, maintaining a consistent distance. Sarah's training kicked in as she plotted her next move. She never got the chance to execute it. As she turned onto her street, emergency lights erupted behind her, not from the sedan, but from two police cars that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The bullhorn crackled to life. "Officer Collins, pull over and exit the vehicle with your hands where we can see them." Max's bark filled the car as Sarah's world began to crumble. In her rearview mirror, she could see more cars approaching, their lights painting her neighborhood in surreal flashes of red and blue. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. "It's okay, Max," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We're going to be okay." But as she put the car in park and reached for her door handle, she knew nothing would be okay for a very long time. They'd found a way to stop her investigation by making her the target. Max's desperate barking was the last thing she heard before the night exploded into shouted commands and the cold bite of handcuffs against her wrists. The last thing she saw was her partner being held back by animal control officers, fighting with every ounce of strength to reach her. Sarah Collins, decorated K-9 officer, was under arrest, and somewhere in Atlanta, Judge Henderson was probably sleeping very well indeed. The holding cell at Atlanta City Detention Center smelled of bleach and despair. Sarah sat on the metal bench, still wearing her navy blue uniform from the night before, now wrinkled from hours of questioning. The charges echoed in her mind: evidence tampering, corruption, drug trafficking. Someone had done their homework, planting a perfect trail of fake evidence that made her look dirty. Through the small window in her cell, she could hear the faint sound of dogs barking from the K-9 facility several blocks away. Her heart ached, wondering if one of those barks belonged to Max. They'd never been apart for more than a few hours since he became her partner. "Collins," Officer Jenkins appeared at her cell door. His refusal to meet her eyes told her everything about how far she'd fallen. "Your lawyer's here." The interview room was even bleaker than her cell. Thomas Wheeler, a public defender with kind eyes and a coffee-stained tie, spread documents across the metal table between them. He'd taken her case despite his overwhelming workload, something about it catching his attention. "They've built quite a case," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Bank records showing mysterious deposits, evidence from your cases that doesn't match official logs, even a witness claiming they saw you plant drugs during a raid. It's all fabricated." Sarah leaned forward, her handcuffs clinking against the table. "I was investigating Judge Henderson, every major drug case he dismissed in the past 18 months. "Stop!" Wheeler held up his hand. "Don't tell me anything else. The room's probably bugged. Look, I believe you're innocent, but we need to be smart about this. They're pushing for no bail, citing your K-9 training as a flight risk." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They really thought of everything, didn't they?" "Almost everything," Wheeler replied, sliding a newspaper across the table. "But they made one mistake. They got greedy with the timeline. These bank deposits they claim you received. They coincide perfectly with Henderson's case dismissals. Too perfectly." A commotion outside interrupted them. Raised voices, followed by the unmistakable sound of barking. Sarah's heart jumped. She'd know that bark anywhere. "That's impossible," Wheeler muttered, moving to the window. "They're trying to transfer your dog to another handler today. He's supposed to be at the training facility." Sarah rushed to join him, ignoring the protest from her guard. Through the window, she could see Max, somehow free from his handlers, racing across the parking lot with 3 officers in pursuit. He was heading straight for the detention center, his powerful legs carrying him effortlessly across the asphalt. "Max," she whispered, pressing her palm against the glass. As if he heard her through the thick walls, Max stopped directly below her window, looking up. Their eyes met for a brief moment before an animal control officer finally caught up with him, loophole extended. "No!" Sarah's shout echoed through the room as Max was captured. The dog fought against the restraint, his eyes never leaving her window, his barks now taking on a desperate tone she'd never heard before. Wheeler pulled her away from the window. "Sarah, listen to me. This doesn't help your case. You need to focus on your defense." But Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene below. Max was her partner, her protector, her family. And now, like everything else in her life, he was being taken away. Later that evening, Sarah learned that Max had escaped by chewing through the kennel's chain-link fence. He'd tracked her scent through 4 miles of downtown Atlanta, navigating traffic and crowds, only to be caught moments after finding her. The thought of his loyalty brought tears to her eyes for the first time since her arrest. Officer Collins, a young guard she didn't recognize, appeared with dinner, a sad-looking sandwich and a carton of milk. "I heard about your dog. My brother works at the K9 facility. Says they've never seen anything like it. Your Max, he won't respond to any other handler, won't eat, won't train, just sits there watching the gate." Sarah took the tray, her throat tight. "Is he okay?" The guard glanced nervously down the hall before whispering, "They're saying if he doesn't cooperate soon, they might have to..." She trailed off, but Sarah understood. A police dog that wouldn't work was a liability. That night, sleep eluded her. Sarah lay on her thin mattress, memories of Max flooding her mind. Their first meeting at the training facility, his intelligent eyes assessing her as she approached his kennel. The countless nights on patrol, his steady presence beside her a constant comfort. The way he could read her moods, offering a gentle nudge when she was down or matching her energy when they were working a case. Officer Jenkins appeared just before dawn. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "They're taking your dog to court tomorrow. Part of the evidence review." Sarah sat up straight. "The preliminary hearing?" Jenkins nodded. "Judge Henderson's courtroom, 9 a.m. He hesitated, then added, "Look, Collins, not everyone believes what they're saying about you. Some of us remember what happened to your father." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Henderson would be presiding over her own case. The corruption ran deeper than she'd imagined, but a small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Max would be there, and if there was one thing she knew about her partner, it was his uncanny ability to sense things others missed. As Jenkins walked away, Sarah remembered something her father had told her before he was killed, investigating police corruption. "The truth has a way of coming out, baby girl. Sometimes it just needs a little help." Tomorrow, she'd see Max again. Tomorrow, she'd face the man who had orchestrated her downfall, and maybe, just maybe, her faithful partner would find a way to help the truth emerge. In the darkness of her cell, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered, "Hold on, Max. We're not done fighting yet." She could almost hear his answering whine, feel his warm presence beside her. Whatever happened in that courtroom tomorrow, she knew one thing for certain. The bond between her and Max couldn't be broken by bars, accusations, or corrupt judges. They would find a way back to each other. They always did. Sarah stood before the mirror in the detention center's bathroom, studying her reflection in the clouded glass. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her court-appointed suit hanging slightly loose on her frame. A week in custody had already begun to take its toll, but it was her eyes that had changed the most, carrying a hardness she'd never seen before. 2 minutes, Collins," the female guard called from outside. As Sarah straightened her collar, her mind drifted to 5 years earlier, to the day that changed her life. The Atlanta Police K9 Training Center had been buzzing with activity, dozens of handlers meeting their potential partners. She'd walked past kennel after kennel, feeling nothing of the connection her instructors had described, until she reached Max. He'd stood at attention, those intense amber eyes locked on hers, no barking, no movement. Just a steady, intelligent gaze that seemed to look straight into her soul. The trainer, Officer Martinez, had approached, clipboard in hand. "This is Max," he'd said, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Belgian Malinois, 2 years old. Highest scores in detection work we've ever seen," but he'd hesitated. "He's rejected 3 handlers already. Won't bond with anyone." Sarah had knelt before the kennel, matching Max's steady gaze. "Hey, partner," she'd whispered. Without breaking eye contact, Max had stepped forward, pressing his nose against the chain link exactly where her hand rested on the other side. Martinez had whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. First time he's approached anyone voluntarily." He'd glanced at her file. "Your father was Jack Collins, wasn't he? One of Atlanta's finest before he was killed investigating police corruption." Sarah had finished quietly. 4 years ago this month, the memory dissolved as the guard opened the bathroom door. Time to go. The courthouse corridors were packed with the usual morning chaos. Lawyers hurrying between hearings, defendants in orange jumpsuits shuffling in chains, families waiting anxiously on hard wooden benches. Sarah kept her head high as she was led through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her. Then she heard it, a familiar whine that cut through all other sound. Max was being led into the courtroom through a side door, his handler struggling to control him as he pulled towards Sarah. His coat was duller than usual, his powerful frame slightly leaner, but his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. "Max, heel!" the handler commanded, yanking the leash. The sound of Max's collar pulling against his throat made Sarah's fists clench. She remembered their first training sessions, how quickly Max had responded to gentle guidance rather than force. Inside Courtroom 4C, Judge Henderson presided from his elevated bench, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses creating an image of distinguished authority that Sarah now knew was a carefully crafted facade. As she took her seat beside Wheeler, she felt Max's eyes on her from his position near the evidence table. "All rise," the bailiff called. "Case number 2025 CR 7425, State of Georgia versus Sarah Collins." The proceedings began with the prosecution laying out their case. Sarah half listened as they described her alleged crimes, her attention drawn to Max's increasingly agitated behavior. Every time Henderson spoke, Max's ears would prick forward, his body tensing. It reminded her of their first major bust together. They'd been searching a warehouse, following a tip about a drug shipment. Max had suddenly changed behavior, focused intently on a seemingly solid wall. His body language had been exactly like this, alert, certain, trying to communicate something crucial. They'd found a hidden door that day, leading to one of the largest drug seizures in Atlanta's history. A case that, Sarah now realized, had been dismissed by Judge Henderson 6 months later on a technicality. Wheeler noticed too. "Your dog seems particularly interested in the judge," he whispered. Sarah watched as Max's handler struggled to keep him quiet. Something was wrong. This wasn't normal behavior for a trained police dog, especially not Max. He'd been in courtrooms dozens of times, always the model of professional composure. Then she saw it. As Henderson leaned forward to examine a document, something glinted beneath his robes, just a flash of metal that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. But Max had seen it too. His growl was low but unmistakable. "Control that animal," Henderson snapped, "or have it removed." The handler tugged Max's leash, but the dog's attention remained fixed on the judge. Sarah's mind raced. Max was trying to tell them something. His behavior wasn't random. It was targeted, specific, just like 3 years ago when he'd tracked a kidnapping suspect through a crowded mall, ignoring hundreds of other scents to find the one that mattered. Just like last year when he'd sensed the scared child hiding in a storm drain before anyone else even knew to look there. Max wasn't just acting out. He was doing his job. As if reading her thoughts, Max turned to meet her eyes. In that moment, Sarah felt the same connection she'd experienced at their first meeting. Whatever was happening here, whatever the judge was hiding, Max knew, and somehow he would help her prove it. "Your Honor," Wheeler stood. "The defense requests a brief recess." Henderson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Granted. 15 minutes. As he stood, Sarah caught another glimpse of metal beneath his robes. This time, she understood Max's reaction. It wasn't jewelry or a medical device. It was something else entirely. The truth her father died trying to expose, the corruption she'd been investigating, the reason for her arrest. It all led back to what was hidden beneath that judge's robes. And Max, with his extraordinary instincts, had found it. Now she just had to find a way to prove it before they silenced her for good. In the back of the courtroom, Max's barks echoed off the wood-paneled walls, a sound that to everyone else might have seemed like disruption, but to Sarah was something else entirely. It was the sound of truth demanding to be heard. Wheeler sat in his cramped office, surrounded by stacks of case files. The ancient desk lamp cast a yellow glow over photographs spread before him. Surveillance shots of Judge Henderson leaving the courthouse, entering restaurants, meeting with figures whose faces never quite showed clearly in the frames. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. After 20 years as a public defender, he'd developed a sixth sense for cases that weren't what they seemed. Sarah Collins' file had set off every alarm bell he had. His phone buzzed, a text from his contact in the courthouse clerk's office. Found something. Loading dock, 20 minutes. Wheeler glanced at his watch. 11:40 p.m. The courthouse would be nearly empty. Perfect. The loading dock was dark except for a single security light. Janet Chen, his longtime friend in the clerk's office, emerged from the shadows clutching a manila envelope. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered, handing it over. "But check the dates on Henderson's dismissals against these security logs. Pay special attention to after-hours visits." Back in his office, Wheeler spread out the new documents. A pattern emerged. Every major drug case dismissal was preceded by a late-night visit to Henderson's chambers, always on Thursdays, always between 10 p.m. and midnight. His phone rang, making him jump. "Wheeler, Tom." Sarah's voice was low, urgent. "Max saw something today. Under Henderson's robe, some kind of metal device." Wheeler's eyes fell on the security logs. "Thursday nights," he muttered. "What?" "Henderson has visitors every Thursday night. No names in the log, just badge numbers." He shuffled papers. "And every case he dismissed the next day involved drug seizures from a specific area of the port." "The port?" Sarah's voice tightened. "That's where Dad was investigating when he died." A knock at his door made Wheeler freeze. Through the frosted glass, he could make out two silhouettes. "I have to go," he whispered. "Be careful." The door opened before he could hide the files. Two men in suits entered, internal affairs badges glinting on their belts. "Mr. Wheeler," the taller one smiled without warmth. "We need to discuss your client." Across town, Sarah lay on her cell bunk, mind racing. The metal device Max had noticed, she'd seen something similar years ago in one of her father's case files. A sophisticated transmission unit used by cartels to coordinate shipments. A commotion down the hall drew her attention, voices growing louder. "You can't just transfer her in the middle of the night." Sarah recognized Officer Jenkins' voice, angry and confused. "Federal orders," an unfamiliar voice replied. "Step aside." Sarah was on her feet when they reached her cell. Two marshals she'd never seen before, accompanied by a stone-faced Lieutenant Martinez. "Collins." Martinez wouldn't meet her eyes. "Pack up. You're being moved to federal custody." "On what grounds?" "National security concerns." One marshal began unlocking her cell. "Let's go." Sarah's training kicked in. The way they stood, the tension in their shoulders. These weren't real marshals. This was an extraction. "I need to use the bathroom first," she said, playing for time. "No time." The second marshal reached for her arm. That's when the lights went out. In the darkness, Sarah heard Jenkins shout, followed by the sound of running feet and a familiar bark that made her heart leap. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a red glow. At the end of the corridor stood Max, hackles raised, Officer Rodriguez holding his leash. "Sarah!" Rodriguez called. "Run!" She didn't hesitate. As the fake marshals reached for weapons, Max launched forward, taking down the nearest one. Sarah ducked under the second man's grab, years of training with Max, making them move in perfect synchronization. They ran through dark corridors, alarms blaring. Rodriguez led them to a service exit, Max clearing the way. "Wheeler called me," Rodriguez explained as they burst into the night air. "Said they were coming for you, that he found proof of Henderson's connection to your father's death." Sirens wailed in the distance. "The device under his robe," Sarah gasped as they ran. "It's the same type Dad was tracking. Henderson's not just dismissing cases, he's coordinating shipments from the courthouse. We need evidence." Max suddenly stopped, nose working the air. Sarah knew that posture. He'd caught a scent. "What is it, boy?" Max turned toward the courthouse, barely visible in the distance. "Thursday night," Sarah realized. Henderson will be there now, making his weekly transmission. Rodriguez checked his watch. If we can catch him in the act. It's a trap, Sarah pointed out. They'll expect us to go there. Yes, Rodriguez smiled grimly. But they won't expect us to have help. He pulled out his phone, showing Sarah a group text. Dozens of officers, all ones who'd worked with her father, all believing in her innocence, all ready to move. Your dad had more friends than enemies, Sarah. We were just waiting for the right moment. Max pressed against her leg, alert and ready. Sarah felt the weight of her father's badge, which Rodriguez had slipped her during their escape. Okay, she said, scratching Max's ears. Let's go catch a judge. The courthouse loomed ahead, dark except for one window high up in the east wing. Thursday night, Henderson's chambers, where a corrupt judge was about to learn that justice sometimes arrives on 4 legs. Sarah looked at Max, saw the same determination in his eyes that she'd noticed that first day at the training center. Ready, partner. His soft whine was all the answer she needed. Time to finish what her father started. The courthouse at night was a different creature entirely. Shadow-draped marble columns loomed like silent sentinels as Sarah, Rodriguez, and Max crouched behind a maintenance van in the parking garage. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear the coordinated movements of their backup, trusted officers positioning themselves around the building's perimeter. "Security cameras are looped," came Officer Chen's voice through the radio. "You've got 8 minutes before the system resets." Sarah checked her borrowed service weapon, the familiar weight both comforting and strange after a week in custody. Beside her, Max's breathing was steady, his focus absolute. He'd been trained for this. They both had. "Remember," Rodriguez whispered, "we need to catch him actually using the transmitter. Just seeing it isn't enough." Sarah nodded. The service entrance lock clicked open, Chen's work again, and they slipped inside. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim blue glow, their footsteps echoing despite their best efforts at silence. Max led the way, his nose working constantly. They'd done countless night searches together, but never like this, never with so much at stake. At the end of the hall, he stopped, ears pricking forward. Voices drifted down from above, multiple speakers, tone urgent but too muffled to make out words. Henderson wasn't alone. They took the service stairs, avoiding the main elevators. 4th floor, 5th, 6th. On the 7th floor, Max's behavior changed. His hackles rose slightly, tail straight, the same reaction he'd shown in court. "Close," Sarah breathed. The corridor leading to Henderson's chambers was dark except for a thin line of light under his door. As they approached, the voices became clearer. "Shipment arrives tomorrow night. We need those papers signed now." An unfamiliar voice, accented. "It's not that simple anymore." Henderson sounding stressed. "That K9 officer's dog. There's something wrong with it. The way it reacts. That's not our problem. You'll sign the dismissals tonight, or..." Max suddenly tensed, a low growl building in his throat. Sarah laid a hand on his head, but she'd heard it too, footsteps behind them. They spun to face 2 armed men emerging from the stairwell. Before either could shout a warning, Rodriguez and Sarah moved in perfect synchronization. 2 quick strikes, and both men went down silently. But Max was no longer focused on them. His attention was fixed on Henderson's door, his growl deepening. Inside, the conversation continued. "Just sign the papers, Judge. Don't make this messier than it needs to be." Sarah met Rodriguez's eyes. No time for subtlety now. "Atlanta PD!" Rodriguez shouted as they burst through the door. "Hands where we can see them." Henderson stood behind his desk, face pale, hand pressed to something beneath his robes. 2 men in expensive suits spun to face the door, weapons appearing in their hands. Max exploded into action, years of training manifesting in a blur of precise violence. He took down the nearest gunman as Sarah and Rodriguez dealt with the second. In seconds, both men were disarmed and subdued. But Henderson was moving, fingers working frantically at his chest. "Stop!" Sarah's weapon trained on the judge. "Show us what's under the robe." Henderson's smile was desperate. "You don't understand. None of you understand how deep this goes." His fingers found what they were seeking. A high-pitched whine filled the air, some kind of transmission. Max's ears flattened against his head. "Step away from the desk," Rodriguez ordered. Instead, Henderson yanked his robe open, revealing a complex device strapped to his chest. "It's already done. They're listening. They're always listening." The device's lights blinked faster, its whine increasing. Max's behavior shifted instantly. Sarah recognized his explosive detection response. "Everybody out!" she screamed. "It's rigged to—" The explosion was small, but focused, designed to destroy evidence rather than kill. The shockwave still threw them all back. Through the smoke and chaos, Sarah saw Henderson bolt for a hidden door behind his bookcase. "Max, with me!" They burst into a narrow maintenance corridor, Henderson's footsteps echoing ahead. Despite his age, fear made him fast, but he wasn't faster than Max. The chase ended at a maintenance elevator. Henderson slammed the gate shut just as they arrived, the ancient lift groaning as it descended. Sarah hit the stairs running, Max right beside her. Down they went, past confused maintenance workers and security guards, following the sound of machinery. They emerged in the sub-basement loading dock just as Henderson reached his car. The judge fumbled with his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. "It's over, Your Honor," Sarah called, weapon raised. "Step away from the vehicle." Henderson turned, and for the first time, Sarah saw real fear in his eyes. Not of her, but of what awaited him if he surrendered. He reached inside his jacket. "Don't," Sarah warned. The judge's hand emerged, holding not a weapon, but a file. "Your father," he said quietly. "He found out too much. I tried to warn him, but—" He held out the file. "This proves everything, all of it. The cartel's connections, the corrupted officials, everyone involved in his death." Sarah's hand shook slightly as she took the file. "They'll kill me in custody," Henderson said. "You should have thought of that before joining them." Sirens wailed outside as backup arrived. Henderson slumped against his car, all pretense of dignity gone. Max stood guard, his posture alert, but calmer now. The threat had passed. Sarah opened the file with trembling fingers. There, in black and white, was everything her father had discovered, everything he'd died trying to expose, everything she and Max had finally brought to light. Rodriguez appeared with other officers, taking Henderson into custody. Evidence teams swarmed the building above. It would take weeks to unravel everything, to follow every connection, to make all the arrests. But for now, Sarah had what she'd spent years searching for: the truth about her father's death and the satisfaction of finishing what he'd started. Max pressed against her leg, looking up with those intelligent eyes that had seen what everyone else had missed. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his powerful neck. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Good boy." Tonight, justice had arrived on 4 legs, wrapped in fur and courage, and Sarah Collins knew that somewhere her father was smiling. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse buzzed with tension 3 months later. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, officers, and citizens all gathered to witness the conclusion of what the media had dubbed the barking justice case. Sarah sat in her freshly pressed uniform, Max at perfect attention by her side. The last 12 weeks had been a whirlwind of investigations, depositions, and revelations. Henderson's files had exposed a web of corruption stretching from the Atlanta ports to the highest levels of the justice system. Judge Martinez, no relation to Sarah's old canine trainer, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the final documents before her. Unlike Henderson, she had a reputation for unwavering integrity. Her presence at this hearing was deliberate, a symbol of the system's commitment to reform. "Will the defendant please rise?" Robert Henderson stood, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange, his once commanding presence diminished by 3 months in federal custody. He'd survived 2 assassination attempts already, his testimony too valuable to lose. "Before I deliver the sentence," Judge Martinez began, "I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances that led us here. Officer Sarah Collins and her K-9 partner Max not only exposed this conspiracy, but demonstrated the true meaning of loyalty, justice, and perseverance. Sarah felt Max shift slightly beside her, his ears pricking forward at the mention of his name. She smiled, remembering all the moments that had led to this day, the late-night stakeouts, the careful gathering of evidence after Henderson's arrest, the gradual unraveling of the cartel's influence. Based on the defendant's cooperation and the extensive evidence provided, Martinez continued, this court sentences Robert Henderson to 20 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The gavel struck, its sound echoing through the courtroom. As Henderson was led away, he paused briefly, looking at Sarah and Max. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, but understanding. He'd chosen his path, just as she'd chosen hers. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Sarah and Max. Camera flashes bounced off his polished K9 unit badge, newly reinstated like his partner. Officer Collins, how does it feel to be vindicated? Is it true that Max is being considered for a special commendation? Will you be returning to active duty? Sarah held up her hand, and the questions subsided. Today isn't about me or Max. It's about every officer who stands up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. It's about my father, Jack Collins, who gave his life trying to expose this corruption, and it's about the promise that justice, though sometimes delayed, will always find its way to the light. Max stood proudly beside her, his presence drawing admiring glances from the crowd. A few children pointed excitedly, and Sarah nodded at their parents' questioning looks. Soon, small hands were gently petting Max, who accepted the attention with characteristic dignity. Officer Collins. A familiar voice cut through the crowd. Janet Chen from the clerk's office approached, holding a package. This was found in the archives during the investigation. I think you should have it. Sarah opened the envelope to find a photograph she'd never seen before. In it, her father stood next to a much younger Henderson, both in uniform. On the back was written, Jack and Rob, Academy graduation 1985, before everything changed. A reminder that corruption rarely started with grand gestures, but with small compromises that grew over time. Rodriguez appeared at her side. Ready to get back to work, partner? We've got a new case waiting. Sarah tucked the photo away. What do you think, Max? Ready for another adventure? Max's soft woof made the children giggle and the reporters smile. But Sarah knew it meant more than that. It meant trust, partnership, and the unshakable bond between a handler and her dog. Back at the K9 unit, Sarah's desk had been kept exactly as she'd left it that night 3 months ago. The files were gone, now evidence in multiple federal cases, but everything else remained, including the small frame holding her father's badge. She added a new photo next to it, Max in the courtroom, alert and focused, the moment he'd first spotted Henderson's hidden device, the moment that had changed everything. You know, Rodriguez said from the doorway, they're talking about making some changes to the K9 training program. Seems dogs might be better at spotting corruption than we thought. Sarah smiled, watching Max settle into his bed beside her desk. They've always been good at it. We just had to learn to listen. Her computer pinged, a new case file, a series of suspicious warehouse fires near the port, possible insurance fraud. Time to get back to work. What do you say, partner? Ready to make the world a little better? Max stood, stretching lazily before padding to her side. His eyes met hers with the same intensity she'd seen that first day at the training center. Ready for anything, as long as they faced it together. Sarah clipped on his leash, feeling the familiar weight of her badge and the responsibility it carried. Her father had taught her that justice was worth fighting for. Max had taught her that she'd never have to fight alone. Together, they walked out into the bright Atlanta morning. There would be other cases, other challenges, other moments when right and wrong hung in the balance. But for now, this was enough. A woman, her dog, and the endless possibility of making a difference. As they climbed into their patrol car, Sarah caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. Not just a K9 unit, but a testament to the power of unwavering loyalty and the simple truth that sometimes justice comes on four legs. Max settled into his specially designed seat, alert and ready. Sarah started the engine, and as they pulled away from the station, she knew that while one chapter had ended, their story was far from over. The streets of Atlanta stretched before them, full of possibilities and promises. And somewhere in the great beyond, Jack Collins smiled down on his daughter and her remarkable partner, knowing that justice was in good hands, and Paws,